If you're an INFJ or if you know an INFJ, you have to watch this video. As an INFJ myself, I'm going to go through all of the ways that INFJs can be manipulated, and most importantly, how to defend against it. So let's get into it. When it comes to INFJs, there's certain ways to communicate with them to elicit different responses, whether positive or negative, through manipulation, which, while generally considered a negative, it could be a positive manipulation in order to elicit different responses, positive or negative, of course. With INFJs, they lead with introverted intuition, which is their first function, which has to do with the things they want to do, their choices, their desires. And so that's a primary way you're going to communicate with them, through extroverted intuition, right? So that's a complementary cognitive function, introverted to extroverted. So if you use extroverted intuition in that kind of positive, optimistic way, it's going to be complementary. Things like, what do you want to do? Where would you like to go? What choice are you going to make? Here are your options, giving them options, choices, freedom of say. So being able to interact with an INFJ in that way is going to elicit a positive response. It's going to elicit optimism. It's going to elicit just a general joyous disposition. INFJs then have a second function. It's a little bit more pessimistic. It's about what other people feel. It's wanting to protect others from harm. It's wanting to be liked. It's wanting to not hurt other people's feelings. So giving positive emotional responses with introverted feelings, saying, I feel good about this. I like you. I feel positive about you. And as we go through this, we'll get a little bit more into how these things work. So with introverted thinking, with TI child for INFJs, INFJs are optimistic with the things they think. They like to think things through. They like to analyze things. When they think something through, they're going to be very have a lot of conviction about it. They're going to have a lot of strong beliefs around it. And so for extroverted thinking, to kind of communicate with them, you're going to want to give them sources, let them think, listen to what they have to say. And this goes all the way down. In INFJs with extroverted sensing as their aspirational function, that's where their joy lies. That's their insecurity, but it's also where their joy comes from. So when they show you things, when they give you experiences, when they make jokes, just give positive feedback, give positive responses, have a good experience around them. So for INFJs, all of these functions kind of come into play, and we'll go through some of these different functions. What I want to talk about is, how to spot manipulation as an INFJ. If you're using your functions, how can you tell if somebody's acting in a way that's going to be, something that will definitely elicit certain responses from you? Are they going to play on your guilt? Are they going to give you choices that are actually bad for you? Are they going to take advantage of the fact that you're very optimistic with your thinking functions and you might believe things without verifying them? And that goes into the TE trickster, right? So for INFJs, there's lots of different ways you can be taken advantage of. And there's different things that people might prey on, right? So for hopes and dreams, that's one of the things. INFJs, their hopes and dreams often being freedom of agency, their future, what they want. So, you can prey on this, and you have to be aware of this if you're an INFJ, by giving them things that sound too good to be true. Saying, oh, you could win this. You could win this, free gift card. Oh, this really good thing can happen if you do this. So giving them kind of things that they can do that are good for their future is a way that INFJs might be taken advantage of. So you want to be aware of that if you're an INFJ. So when it comes to their FE, it's more skeptical, right? So that's the parent function. A little bit more skeptical. A way that INFJs might be manipulated is guilt tripped, made to feel guilty, blamed for things, made to feel like things are their fault. And that goes into FI critic, the critic of fault, which is introverted feeling, is an individual judgment of self through emotion. So being guilt tripped through emotional functions is something that INFJs are going to want to be aware of. You're going to want to make sure that you're balancing your emotions. You're not blaming yourself for everything, because people might take advantage of that by putting the blame on you. What their prideful optimism is. INFJs are pretty pridefully optimistic with what they know. They think that what they know is true. So you lie to an INFJ and then they believe you, they might think that's true without necessarily second guessing it, without necessarily verifying it with other people. INFJs are very honest, so they can sometimes assume other people are honest as well and be a little blind to how people are different. And that's kind of what the trickster function is all about, how it kind of lacks that opposing perspective. It has its version of honesty, and it doesn't always verify other people's levels of honesty. So that's kind of an optimism that can be taken advantage of, and INFJs want to be aware, okay, sometimes I can be a little believing of people. I might not always assume people are liars. I'm going to have to watch out for that and make sure I'm not taken advantage of. Preying on an INFJ's fear. So INFJs are going to want to make sure that they're safeguarded so that they're not taken advantage of by being taken advantage of what they're afraid of. They're afraid that they're not enough for other people. They're afraid that no one's going to stick around for them. They're afraid that other people aren't going to be there for them in the end. So their fear of loneliness is something that people might take advantage of in some way, promising, connection, promising community of some sort, or, saying no one else is going to want to be with you. No one else is going to love you because I'm the only one that will stick around you. I'm the only one that will fulfill your deepest fear. So that's something INFJs are going to want to be aware of, that people aren't taking advantage of that weak spot. Their worries. INFJs, we didn't quite get into that, have NE nemesis. So the nemesis of their hero is the opposing perspective, the extroverted intuition, what choices other people are going to make, the things that other people will want to do. So they're worried about what could go wrong, all of these potentials, right? NE is all about imagination, as people know. It's also, when in the nemesis slot, it's worrying about things with their imagination. So imagining negative possibilities. So people might take advantage in some way, or they could theoretically manipulate in some way by eliminating your worries, promising of eliminating your worries, promising that nothing will go wrong, trying to eliminate any worries you might have about what could go wrong. And then when it comes to their, extreme pessimism INFJs have through that FI critic, very hard on themselves, never feel good enough, never feel valuable, that function will often just be avoided altogether, because in general, you don't want to trigger a critic function because it's just so pessimistic. So, you're not going to be necessarily flattering an INFJ in order to manipulate them. And if you're an INFJ, you're not going to have to worry too much about being manipulated through flattery. It's just not a way that an INFJ gets manipulated. So that's almost, the critic function is the most defended in that way. But it can be taken advantage of if people are blaming you, putting fault on you, saying you're a bad person, and you believe it deep down inside. So you can be shamed very easily as an INFJ because you always have that FI critic that wants to make you feel ashamed. So that's a way you might get taken advantage of, and you have to be safeguarded against that. And then the blind spot I talked about a little bit before, that TE blind spot can be a little believing. It can be trusting in the things people say. It might not always verify them. It might not check them with additional sources because they just, process the information as it's presented without necessarily understanding where that information is coming from. So you want to make sure you're not being gullible, that you're not being too believing, that you're skeptical of every, piece of information that's presented to you, that you verify it, yes, but you also try and make sure the source itself is good. So you don't just go, this person said that this person did this, and because of that, I'm going to believe that. I'm going to make a bunch of assumptions. You want to make sure that your sources are good. And then your hatred being played on, the things that you really want to avoid, right? INFJs don't like being alone. They hate the idea of being alone with SI Demon, and they really don't like, having to do things, having obligations, having their freedom taken away. And so presenting options, not taking their freedom away, these are different things that INFJs want to be aware of. When it comes to manipulation, you could even prey on their hatred, because INFJs, they have SI Demon, which is all about loyalty, and they can be very hateful when other people betray them, when their loyalty is taken advantage of. And so preying on that desire for revenge, you might have someone interact with you in that way, and you want to make sure people aren't feeding the hate monster too much. So when it comes to an INFJ, here are some kind of thought patterns that INFJs may have that people might interact with in a certain way. INFJs, they're anti-hero. I really want to do this. I'm really excited about doing this. Future imagination, fantasy. And then the complementary perspective is, you're really going to want to do this. This is going to be great for your future, right? So that's going to prey on the INFJ mindset. And so you want to be aware of that if you're an INFJ. I hope you don't feel bad, FE parent, right? I hope no one's, mad at me. I hope, there's no conflict. Yeah, no, I feel good. And don't worry, there's no conflict at all, right? So resolving the worry. I really think this is true, right? TI child, I really think this is true. I've really thought this through. Yeah, you're buying this, right? You're definitely thinking this is true, right? So selling them kind of false senses of what is true is a way that INFJs might have to be, careful of, something they're going to want to be careful of when it comes to manipulation. I'm afraid that you need more, right? The fear of an INFJ. I'm afraid that I'm not enough for you. No, no, no. I don't need more. Don't be afraid. You're enough, right? So resolving that fear. You don't want this. You don't want to do that, right? Any nemesis worrying about what other people are going to choose. No, no, I do want this. Don't worry. I am going to make the same choice as you, right? Resolving the fear, lining up the choices that you're making with the choices an INFJ is making. I feel terrible about myself, right? FI critic. Yeah. Don't even worry about your feelings. You're always gonna feel bad. Don't even worry about that, right? A manipulator would ignore that function. You don't really know anything. I don't really know anything. Yeah. That makes sense, right? Trickster doesn't really understand what other people know because it's a weak spot for an INFJ. So the other person isn't going to necessarily say what they know. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to do this. I can do whatever I want. That's what an INFJ would say. And then the manipulator would say, yeah, you don't really need to do this. You don't have to worry about this, right? So taking away the obligation in favor for the freedom, taking away the worry of conflict by saying there's no conflict, saying whatever they want to be true in order to trick the INFJ into thinking it's true, taking away social fears, social worries in order to make them feel happy. So these are the kind of the things that you have to be aware of, right? So the negative manipulation tactics, selling that optimistic future, the too good to be true future, boasting potentially about good qualities, right? So there's a level of that where INFJs do have extroverted feeling. So, they think other people have worth, other people have value. So other people might boost themselves up and they can kind of use that with their TE, say good things about themselves, lie about how great of a person they are, lie about their credentials, lie about their morals. And an INFJ might believe them because they're looking for the good in others. So INFJs are going to want to be aware of that yes, while it's okay to look for the good in others, make sure that you're aware that people might take advantage of that. Prideful people, narcissistic people might take advantage of that. Deceiving that trusting open mind of an INFJ assuming, well, I don't lie to people, so other people won't lie to me, getting taken advantage by people that will lie and will lie often. That's going to be a weak spot in your cognitive functions. Eliminating fears, eliminating worries, right? So that's another way that INFJs can get taken advantage of and are going to want to be careful. Somebody saying, you're enough, you're wanted, you're needed, right? So preying on those perceiving function fears. INFJs confident with their own perceiving functions, insecure about the external perceiving functions. That's the way it works. Introverts a little more anxious about the external world, wanting approval, more insecure, less confident, and people preying on that by giving positive feedback, giving lots of positive reinforcement, and an INFJ really enjoying that. Yeah, you're enough. You're great. You're doing a great job. Don't even worry about it. Nothing's gonna go wrong. Don't worry about what could happen. Trying to take away those worries so that an INFJ is more optimistic. Avoiding the pessimism in general, not flattering an INFJ. INFJ's not being flattered, so they're not getting that warning sign of this person's trying to manipulate me because they're not being flattered. They're just being flattered in different ways. Abusing that blind spot. People might lie, abusing it by not, taking advantage of the fact that you're not verifying things that you're really trusting. And potentially playing on an INFJ's source of hatred, a source of bitterness and resentment about the world by saying, everybody betrays you. You don't need that person. Everybody just screws you over anyway, so don't trust people. And that's going to be, a positive response to an INFJ because they go, yeah, it's true. I don't trust people. So really, when it comes to manipulation, positive or negative, it's saying the things that they want to hear and saying the things that they already think. So it's a lot of confirming the previous bias. And we're not going to go too much into the positive ways that you can use this information to really kind of have an INFJ feel understood and loved. And we'll get more into that in a different video. This is more about if you're an INFJ or an INFJ, how to protect them from manipulation. Where's their gullibility? Where's their anxieties that can be taken away that's going to make them feel really confident, potentially falsely confident? How are they going to be flattered in a way that they'll believe? How are they going to be flattered in a way that they're going to buy? And an INFJ has FI critics, so people think, oh, they're they can't be flattered. They're really hard on themselves. Sure, there's truth to that. But what if someone tells them they're really smart and they have really good ideas? Well, that's going to be a flattery that's complementary with their own optimism. What if someone says, oh, you're really strong and impressive with SE? You have really good skills. you give everyone a good experience. Well, then the INFJ is going to feel, yeah, that makes me feel better about myself. I'm going to become confident, potentially overconfident. If I'm getting way too much positive feedback, that's not, genuine. It's not real. Obviously, I'll go into that in a different video. If you guys are interested, positive ways to give reinforcement and communicate with an INFJ. That isn't manipulation, but it's understanding who they are and treating them the way they want to be treated without, taking advantage of these things. But these are the ways that an INFJ could be taken advantage of and are going to want to be careful when it comes to defending themselves, making sure that people aren't preying on the things that they already think. People aren't preying on their desire for freedom and taking advantage of them and selling them a bill of goods, which isn't really true, that people aren't guilt tripping them or just love bombing them and making the INFJ feel loved too much. Want to be skeptical about that. Making sure that the INFJ, yes, thinking things through, but not believing people all the time, not assuming people will be honest the way they are, being careful about that. The INFJ, yes, wanting people to stick around for them, wanting people to be loyal, but not just wanting someone just because they're sticking around, still verifying their behavior, still trying to be treated well, not just loving someone because they're there and you're lonely. So that's something you want to be careful about. And when it comes to those ego functions, preying on that ego is going to be a primary way of manipulation, but also kind of avoiding the shadow is a way that INFJs may be taken advantage of as well, right? So yes, INFJs are paranoid, worried about what people are going to do, and that can prevent them from being manipulated because they're going to be skeptical of people's intentions, and that can be a positive. But if people aren't really, saying their intentions, if people are just focused on the INFJ's intentions, they can get around that a little bit. And same for the critic. Don't focus on the INFJ's self-worth, just focus on your own self-worth. Say good things about yourself, and the INFJ might believe that. But if you're, love bombing them and saying they're awesome and adoring them, the INFJ won't believe you. So there's things that you can say that an INFJ just won't believe. And so, that's a safeguard INFJs have, is pessimism to protect themselves. But there's things in their brain that don't protect themselves from manipulation. Having that lack of TE and SI demon's really low, right? So their long-term memory is low. INFJs may become forgetful. They may forget things from long ago. And that can be taken advantage of if people prey on the fact that they don't remember things, that they're not remembering what happened. And then a person might lie or create a narrative of what happened, and the INFJ might not remember well enough to verify that and be skeptical. So you can prey on the functions they lack, and an INFJ has to be aware that they lack these functions so that they're not taken advantage of. So that's just really important for an INFJ to be aware of how they respond to certain, statements, certain stimuli, certain actions. When people are acting really loyal to them and are always by their side, they're going to respond positively with SE. Right? When people really listen to them, they're going to respond positively with TI. When people favor them and like them more than others, they're going to respond positively. When people let them make the say and let them be the leader and let them make the calls, they don't always get that because they're introverts. They're going to respond positively. And so they just have to be aware, is this person just using these functions, without necessarily knowing this, but is this person maybe taking advantage of me through these functions in the positive way? And same with the negative way, being manipulated through things like guilt, being manipulated through things like the critic function, how you're already hard on yourself and that people are just reinforcing something that you believe, because it's all about what you already believe about yourself and what you believe to be true. If you believe your future is going to be good, people might trick you in that way. If you believe that you're guilty, you believe you're not good enough, people might manipulate you through that. If you believe that things are going to go wrong and you're not going to be wanted, people are going to tell you things that cause you to respond in the way of going, that is true, that is also what I think. So being aware of when people are reinforcing the way you already feel and when they're not reinforcing the way you already feel, when people are reinforcing the things you already believe and already think, and when people are saying something that doesn't reinforce what you think and what you believe. So having that balanced perspective, trying to balance the optimism and the pessimism, is a tricky thing to do, but doing that and trying to understand all of those different perspectives is important for an INFJ to stop manipulation before it's too late. Otherwise, they're going to be in difficult situations, not necessarily taking care of themselves, feeling overly guilty, surrounded by narcissists who lie to them and who are preying on their desire for external validation. So that's kind of the summary. There's more to get into, but that's about as much as I've written down. If you guys are interested in a series like this for different personality types, maybe a deeper dive into INFJs, maybe the positive side of it, how to emulate and treat INFJs the way they want to be treated based on their optimism and pessimism. Let me know in the comments down below. Please like and subscribe as it helps the channel. I hope you all have a great day.